Hello, and welcome to the Three Questions podcast, where we dive deep into the world of wealth management and connect you with industry experts. I'm your host, Wayne Baxter, Senior Executive Manager at One Capital Management. Are you or someone close to you trying to decide how to pay college tuitions? That can be a big ticket. Well, stay tuned. Our topic today is the three questions U.S. and Canadian families should ask before paying big bucks for university tuitions. Thank you for taking time to check us out. And if you enjoyed this episode of the Three Questions podcast, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our podcast and YouTube channels. On this episode of the podcast, we're tackling a major financial challenge for U.S. and Canadian families, and that is paying for university tuitions. With U.S. college costs averaging just over $38,000 a year annually, that's for private schools, and Canadian tuitions hitting $7,000 for domestic students, plus international fees can be up to $40,000 a year. Funding education without derailing your finances is critical, and it can be a real challenge. So our topic, again, the three questions U.S. and Canadian families should ask before paying big bucks for university tuitions. And joining us from Boston, Massachusetts is Jack Wang, and he's with IAG Wealth Management. And Jack is a leading voice. He's quoted in Forbes, CNN, and he helps families maximize aid and pay smarter. Jack, great to see you, fellow podcaster. Thank you. Welcome to the podcast today.
Wayne, thank you so much for having on. I'm so excited to be here and looking forward to our discussion about this because
Sure.
it's such a big deal for a lot of families.
100%. And as someone who navigates, U.S. and Canadian markets seamlessly, I'm excited. I've been wanting to do this for a while. I'll put it out there right now. I know we're supposedly, in the same industry and whatnot, but you're someone I definitely wanted to have on the podcast and have this conversation. And, I really wanted to start, financial services, how can I put it? There's a term I use, and I'm going to coin it from a good friend of mine, Janice Miller, with Miller Haga Law over in Calabasas, California. Hi, Janice. There's a term called cooperation. So, we all have sort of our niche in financial services. I'm known across the U.S. and Canada as a cross-border financial advisor. I work with a lot of Canadians and U.S. families that have liquid assets in both countries, and all. That's kind of been my focus. Your focus, even though you're also a wealth manager, is on education planning. So I'm interested to learn, how did you end up choosing that to be kind of your superpower?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll just share quickly, right? I grew up on the East Coast. I'm here in New England, Boston area. So we say we know a guy. I know a guy, right? Like Wayne,
Yeah.
you're the guy for a cross border, right? US Canadian. And I like to think that I'm the guy for college planning. But how I started all this really was based on personal need. So years ago, I was getting divorced. My two sons were in junior high at the time. Their mother had been divorced previously, so she had a little bit more experience, fortunately or unfortunately, I guess, depending how you look at it, of having gone through that process. And so, as part of our agreement, she wanted to put in something more substantive in the divorce agreement about us paying for college. Coincidentally, at that time, I was actually playing in a men's baseball league. I was an outfielder and our starting shortstop, and one of our pitchers was at that time a financial aid officer for a major internationally known college here in the Boston area.
And there's more than one,
So
by the way.
there's more than one. I won't give away sort of where he
For
was,
sure.
but
There's
but if
several.
I mention it, everybody would know it.
For sure.
And so he helped me learn about this, and so I was asking him questions, and he was very generous with his time and information. We're still great friends today. Or he's since moved on, but we're still great friends today. And so I figured, if this is something that I need to know, and it's confusing for me as someone going through that process, that divorce process, I figured other families would need to know as well. And so that's really how I got my start, was really just out of personal need, because up until that time, I was probably not unlike most other people, which is save as much money as humanly possible and hope your kids get good grades, and then just like pray, right? Like pray they get a good scholarship or something, and just hope it all works out. But it's far, far more nuanced than that.
Yeah, not only, as I mentioned earlier, are both you and I, in wealth management business, but we're also podcasters, or so I've been told. I guess this is what we're doing. So, why don't you talk a little bit about your podcast?
Yeah, my podcast is actually on all the major platforms. It's called Smart College Buyer. And I go, so as by license, I'm a, financial advisor, like you, wealth manager. But as you mentioned, I focus exclusively on this. So my podcast, I really focus on the financial side of college, whether it's paying for it, strategies, how aid works, things like that. I do also have guests on who cover other tangentially related topics, student loans, test prep, admissions, whatever. But in all of those things, people often think about how they're different, right? Getting into college is one thing, then figuring out how to pay for is a completely different thing. But in reality, they're very intertwined, and emissions has an impact on aid and vice versa. And so I talk a lot in my content, not just on my podcast, but also just videos and elsewhere on the intersection of those things and how one impacts the other. So I I'm many episodes in, and I've still have many episodes banked, ready for release. So I'm very excited. I'm having a great time with it. Not only doing solo episodes, but also interviewing guests and just having fun, sharing information.
Yeah. Well, I guess the feeling is mutual here as well. I've been, we were in the second. Well, we've done over, I don't know how many now, well over 100, and become kind of a labor of love, I guess for sure. And really, again, glad you could join us. Uh, just turning back to our topic, tuition. We always hear about the term inflation. Everybody, it's a hot button topic, can be used truthfully or for political motivation, but there is something called inflation in tuitions, right? And sometimes it can be anywhere 3 to 5% or even higher. And you have in the US and Canada now they're dealing with rising fees for international students. Uh, do you what are your thoughts in terms of this from the context of the economy and in terms of affecting planning for clients for the fact that we're seeing rising inflation, we're seeing expensive costs. Are you finding families coming to you feeling like these funding their kids' education is almost like a mountain too high to climb now? Do you have people sharing?
Yeah. So one of the challenging things about college, and especially the financial side of college, is that there are many different prices, if you will, right? There's the sticker price of, which is tuition, or housing and food, books, fees, et cetera, et cetera. And for the longest time, people used to think that there was a line that you couldn't cross, and that was $100,000. Well, there's a college here now, private college here in the Northeast, that has since crossed that line. We'll see what the impact is. But there's still a lot of colleges in the $90,000 range. And when I say, by the way, I mean US dollars, right? So I'm not
Right.
exchanging into Canadian dollars here.
Understood. No, you're fine.
Um, so the top line number, right? The sticker price does grow, has historically grown. And there is a psychological aspect to that. In that a lot of colleges, especially their upper tier colleges, are viewed as a luxury good, right? Much like a luxury handbag or a luxury sports car or
Sure.
exotic sports car or something. So the price sort of connotes value at that end, or it seems to impart value, right? It really doesn't. There's a whole nother that's a whole nother discussion. But people perceive it like, well, the more expensive this thing, the better it must be. And those prices do go up. The reality, however, for the vast majority of US colleges is families do not pay sticker price. They pay something far less. And you see this in the press all the time, like, well, the average family pays X dollars at private school, X dollars at private public school, whatever. And the rate of growth in the actual prices paid is actually far lower than the top line inflation number, because you have aid, and as prices do go up, colleges generally try to give a little bit more aid to keep the costs affordable. Costs do still go up, but not nearly as bad as what the headlines say.
So even
I
though
will
you're
say,
quoting the
however,
3.5 to 5% range, actually the net at the end of the day could actually be significantly lower.
yeah, and it this is going to sound
Providing
silly,
they
but
take the right steps. I think the key part though, if this is again sorry, Jack, I think about this from the standpoint, the worst thing for anybody to do, I think, whether you live in Canada or the US, is try to be a do-it-yourselfer.
right,
There's a lot
right,
of experts
exactly.
out there. So if someone retains someone like you to help strategize the education plan in more detail, they're going to have a better outcome most likely, and then try to tackle it on their own. Is kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah, there's so many misconceptions about this, about college financial aid, the process, what have you. Um, because many parents, families I deal with, the parents went to college themselves 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or more, and the landscape is just completely different. How student loans work is completely different. But unless you do this all the time, right? Like, unless this is your field, the families have no chance of knowing what sort of keeping up with the changes because they're busy with other stuff, right? They're busy living their own lives. So it's hard to keep up with, and which just adds to the confusion, unfortunately.
Which is exactly why I wanted to have you on today. And so again, very happy that you could make it. So on this episode of the Three Questions podcast, we are discussing the three questions US and Canadian families should ask before paying big bucks for university tuitions. Jack, let's get right to our questions. Time's a wasting, as they say. So question number one, which schools will provide the most financial aid towards my children's tuition? Mr. Wang,
Yeah,
take it
it's
away.
it's a great question, and unfortunately, it's a question that far too few families ask. The vast majority of the world, and when I say that, I mean like 95, 99% of the way families approach this with their high school guidance counselors is to first figure out where their kids can get in, right? Or what their kids need to do to get into whatever school.
Right.
But the reality is, if money matters to families, um, you have to approach it differently. And the question you have to ask is which schools will offer your kids the most aid.
Hmm.
And here's the other thing. One of the most common misconceptions is people, you can look up the financial aid formula on the internet, right? You can Google it pretty easily. The families think about how the numbers are black and white. If I qualify for this, then I must get this. And that could not be further from the truth.
Hmm.
The best way to think about this, believe it or not, is the way that aid works at US colleges is very similar to the NFL draft. Right. So I don't know about the CFL draft. I can't comment on that. I
Let's
don't
stick
follow
with
that
the NFL, or
closely.
maybe come with the NHL hockey draft. But
Or NHL
stick.
hockey, right? But
Well,
so
let's go with
basically,
back
if
to
you
the
think about
NFL.
yeah, if you think about the draft, right? NFL teams view players differently. Some teams might view a particular player as a great player. Other teams may not, for whatever
Yeah,
reason.
definitely
But
applies to
generally,
the
the
NHL for sure.
right. So generally, if you're drafted in the early rounds, you're going to get a lot more money than the later rounds, right? And also, teams draft for needs. So if you need a quarterback, you take one. If you don't need one, you don't draft one early and spend a lot of money for it. Mhm. Well, if you think about that, but in the college context, and the colleges were the NFL teams, if you will, colleges evaluate different students differently. They essentially rank them, for any given student. Are you the first round draft pick or the seventh round draft pick? And colleges are constantly adding majors, or they're trying to draw students from a particular geography or gender or any other factor or a combination of all the above. So the bottom line is that the more the student helps the college meet the college's needs, right? And the college might be expanding this major. So they're trying to
Interesting.
attract more
So
students to that
it's
major,
almost the
whatever.
inverse
Right?
philosophy where you're trying to accommodate a college as opposed to hoping the college will accommodate you.
Exactly. The more you accommodate the college, the more aid you get. Period. Right? Like you could be a super high income, super high net worth family, and I've had families say, "Well, I don't qualify for need based aid. We're too rich." Well, yeah, on paper that may be true, right? The formula may say that to be true, but if your student checks all the boxes for that college, you're going to get aid, right? Maybe not need based aid, but merit aid, or you're going to get something because you're helping the college meet its goals. And that, quite honestly, is the simplest version of how aid actually works, right? Without
And
getting to the formula of this counts, that counts, whatever. Think of the
and
NFL or an NHL or
and this would
presumably the
apply.
CFL draft.
And Jack, even if you're living in, say, London, Ontario, or Halifax, Nova Scotia, or if you're looking to apply for a U.S. school, the same thing would apply to some degree, no?
Right. So the rules are a little bit different when it comes to international students. So even those coming in from Canada, the general rule of thumb is international students here in the U.S. do not qualify for U.S. federal aid, right? And that's true whether you're coming from Canada or England or France or South Africa, right? Take your pick. Um, but the vast majority of aid to students is from the university's own pockets, what we call institutional aid. And so the
Right.
rules for that are 100% what I just said, right? So
Exactly.
if that student from Canada is coming from Ontario is coming in and checks the boxes for the US school, that kid's going to get a lot of aid, even though they might not qualify for US
Interesting.
federal aid.
Fascinating. Okay, so just to carry on just as a follow-up, you know, there should be, I would imagine, some factors that these families, whether they're US or Canadian families, that need to sort of compare when evaluating the school's financial aid packages just to make sure that they're getting the best value. So, are there any specific things they should be thinking about?
So
Any specific factors, I guess, would be the best way to.
yeah, so when families get to that stage where they get the award offers, right? So this be after their students apply, get
Right.
accepted, and then after that. Um, One of the challenges here, particularly in the US, and again, I can't speak to Canadian colleges, is that many schools will send their financial aid award letters or emails these days, but but they can be very hard to compare. So, for example, some schools include only what we call direct costs, which are the costs that are actually payable directly to the college: tuition, fees, housing, and food. Other schools will include direct and indirect costs. Indirect costs would be things like books, transportation, miscellaneous, what have you, right? And that can end up being thousands of dollars different. So one of the things I tell families often is when you're comparing, you have to make sure you're comparing apples to apples because one school might seem less money, but that's because they left off a bunch of costs, right? So that's one. Another thing is to also look at what type of awards you're actually getting. And so scholarships, grants, whatever. And schools do front load. And so, it sounds awesome. You want to be able to say, oh, my son or my daughter got this huge scholarship. But ideally, the scholarship runs all 4 years of undergraduate. That's not always true. Some schools will front load, give you more money first year, essentially kind of suck you in. And then some of the aid disappears. And then, of course, your kid says, well, I don't want to leave because all my friends are here. Right now, you're stuck with a bigger bill. So you want to make sure what the qualifications or the criteria to keep that aid. The other thing also is you want to know what is sort of need-based versus merit.
Hmm.
Um, and the terms on this can be very confusing. So as a general rule, merit scholarships are called scholarships, and any need-based financial aid are generally referred to as grants.
Got it.
However, there are several extremely well-known schools in the US, right? Internationally known schools in the US that do not do merit scholarships, but they call their need-based grants as scholarships. And that's important because now if it's truly based on financials and their financials change later on, they make more money, they sell something, have a huge capital gain or whatever, those things could disappear potentially. So the verbiage also matters. And then lastly, there's some schools that will present the offer like, okay, here's the cost, here's the aid, right? Scholarships, grants, whatever. And then they'll leave a balance kind of in small letters, and then they'll sort of insert loan amounts to cover that balance. And at the bottom line, you see this big fat zero. So the parents think, wow, college is free, right? Like they
Yeah.
gave us enough aid to make it free. When in reality, the college insert line said, no, no, no. What it is you're out of pockets, nothing if you take this giant loan, which
Right.
obviously not everybody wants. So there's a lot of these little
Yeah, we
nuances.
we
So you want
actually
to
had that
read it very
experience with our
carefully.
daughter, believe it or not, at a private art school, and that's exactly you nailed it right on the button. Yeah, the big no cost to you, but they were basically want to attach a nice big college loan right at the very front end. So yeah, I'm very
Right.
familiar with that.
And unfortunately it's more common than I would like, right?
To the extent that I often wonder what the motivation here is. This a school or a financial services business? In some instances. Okay, Jack, great answer to question number one. Let's move on to question number two. And this is a question, again, this goes back to, when I was working in Canada back in the 2000s up before I moved here to Southern California. Clients would come in, they got kids, 3, 4, 5 years old, and they would ask, about education planning, when. And so I'm going to pose it to you as my friend and colleague, how early, this is coming from the family now, how early should I begin planning for my children's post-secondary education? I can't wait to hear your response to this one.
Well, I suppose in an ideal world, it's as early as possible. And I was
Yeah.
speaking with somebody else
Now?
not that long ago, and actually this person I'm speaking with, they said, well, if you can like catch the parents in the delivery room, that'd be a great time
Yeah,
to do this. But
yeah.
but that's
Oh, you
not
had to you
that's
had to
not
get
so realistic,
yeah, you have
right?
to get the social insurance number in Canada and the social security number in the US is like a
Right.
good starting point.
Right, exactly. So as early as possible. However, there actually is an answer for what we call the late stage planning process, which is what I
Right.
do. So the best way to explain this is to use some dates. So let's suppose, right, as we're recording this in the middle of 2025, let's suppose that your student is going to go to college, right? They're going to start freshman year of college in fall of 2025, which means they were a senior in high school starting fall of 2024, right? And during the fall of senior year of high school, they would have filled out a financial aid form. And in the fall of 2024, financial aid forms are based on the most recently completed tax return. Well, at that time, the most recently completed tax return would be 2023.
Mhm.
And that's known as what we call prior year. So then if you think about, well, what grade was my kid in calendar year 2023? That's the tax return. And if you do the math, it's equal to the spring of sophomore year through that summer into the fall of junior year of high school. And so that's known as the base year or the first year that financial aid will look at for income. So anything you do before then doesn't matter, right? Do whatever you want, go win the lottery, whatever, knock yourself out. But that base year forward, and obviously you could go longer than 4 years if you have multiple kids that overlap, right? Those are the years you want to be a little bit careful. And I lay that out this way is because if you look at the average student in high school, at least here in the US, they don't really talk about college and they don't have the conversation with their guidance counselor about college until the spring of junior year. And the reason spring of junior year is because in the fall of the school year, the guidance counselors are busy with the seniors getting those applications out and their transcripts out and everything else. So then come the spring of that year, those seniors are largely done. So now the guidance counselors have time to talk to the juniors. But if you think about what I just said, right, the first conversation about college is spring of junior year, when you normally would have had to think about this by a year prior, spring of sophomore year or earlier. So when I say it's earlier than people think, that's why it's earlier than people think.
You ever have people come to you, Jack, and tell you, they make up a portion of their income on bonuses, and they say, "I want to max out my financial aid, so I want to." Should I persuade my employer to defer my bonus until after that window of income reporting?
Yeah, I mean, if to the extent that you can control that, right? So,
Can't control
the
salary. I
joke
was just
is,
thinking, I was just off the top of my head, I'm thinking to myself, there's somebody out there going, you know what? I'm going to tell my boss to defer on my bonus because I want to max out on my kids' aid for school. Um, Interesting anyway.
right. So if you could tell your boss to give you the multi-million dollar bonus before that year,
or
right?
or defer it, or
Or
defer it.
maybe yeah, or defer until sort of you're out of the financial aid window after you get,
Yeah, that's what I was
basically
thinking.
it's junior year of college. And then of course, you'll take your millions of dollars in bonus. That'll be, if you can do that, then it'll be great, right? This thing becomes easy.
Yeah. I value your experience. You're clearly demonstrating your proficiency here, and I really do value it. So, based on your experience, and I guess we're looking backwards here, what's the biggest mistake you've seen families make when they start college planning too late? And if they do that, is there a catch up? Is it, or is it basically it's too late? How do you what's your experience on that when you get into the situation where they've made what's the mistake and how do they get caught up?
So the most common mistake I would say through this is looking at schools without looking at potential price tags first. I like perfect example. I just got a text from a friend the other day. One of their clients, the student got into a big time Ivy League school, but did not get any aid. The kid, now by this time, the kid has submit the enrollment deposit, right? The kid is committed to going to that school in the fall, and now the parents are sweating because they're not sure they can afford to pay for it,
It's a
right?
big
Like
ticket.
like you've
Ivy League schools, man, are no
yeah, I
joke.
mean, and I'm like your kid's moving in a dorm room in like the span of 2.5 months. And now you're worried about whether or not you can pay for it, right? Like we should have had this conversation a long time ago. So, in those cases, it's very difficult to do anything because the decision's already been made and the kid's already committed. And what I often say is somebody ends up crying in those circumstances, right? You either tell
Yeah.
your kid you can't go and they're crying, or your kid is going to go and the parents are crying because they're going to end up living
Yeah.
under a bridge later on. So, right. So that's a very common thing. And so, are there potentially strategies to still sort of take care of that situation? Yes, but those are more around how to pay for it without wrecking your future rather than trying to get more aid out of the school because that ship has
Right.
already sailed.
So let's just move on to question number three. Jack Wang, you've been a great guest today. I knew you would be. Um, so our third question of the podcast today is what are the strategies that we can use? This is from a family's perspective now, right? What are the strategies that we can use to pay for our children's college tuition? So I'm going to let you get started and I might chime in here as well. So take it away.
So if you think about the majority of the world, they will use one of a handful of strategies, right? You can obviously use savings, whether it's a 529 or just money that you have saved up or employer stock or whatever the case may be, and just pay the bill. That's one strategy. Another strategy, obviously common, is borrowing, right? And
Student
most of the
loans,
world
well
use
known in America. Oh boy.
yeah, very well known in America, right? So it's an option for a lot of people. And so people tend to view it in a very binary sense, right? It's either one or the other. Or colleges do offer like monthly payment plans for each academic year, right? So you can cash flow the payments and you can mix and match of the three also. So those are the most common. However, for those people who want to do better, or maybe they're a little bit more concerned about their financial future and worry about writing a large check every year, there are many tax related strategies. There are strategies that you may intentionally borrow for. So as an example, now again, I will with the caveat this is not advice, right? Educational, entertainment purposes only,
100%
right?
exactly right.
But like if you have a family, let's say that has employer stock, or let's say they just saved up a lot of money investments that they were going to sell to pay for college, right? Well, at least here in the US, you're going to be subject to capital gains taxes and probably high ones. So why not gift some of those assets to your kid? And there's some tax rules you have to worry about, true. But if you gift those same investments in kind to your kid and then like your kid turn around and sell it, they're at either a zero or low tax rate.
Most
And you
likely.
may
Yeah.
yeah, most likely, and you may even want to bridge time. So that would be an example of where you may want to intentionally borrow, to bridge the time so that you can have the kids sell at an advantageous tax rate or what have you. So that'd be an example of a tax related strategy. Um, and so there's a lot off of that. One of the things I often say to people is one of the best ways to save and pay for college is to be self-employed or own a business because of the tax-related strategies beyond what we just talked about. Um, and so you can get pretty advanced in this stuff. Um, and so the basic thinking here is this. Remember that college is an after-tax cost, and so we earn
100%.
our money, we pay our income taxes, right, out of our paycheck or quarterly withholding or whatever, and then what's left, we save or pay for college and groceries and everything else. So your $100,000 a year tuition is after tax. Pre-tax, that's probably like 100, 130, 140,000, depending on whatever bracket you're in.
Exactly right.
So the idea is that if you were going to have to pay the taxes anyway, but now we use a tax related strategy to help you save on those income taxes, then you can use those income tax savings to help pay for college because otherwise you're going to have to pay the taxes anyway. And that's no fun. Right. So, so there's a lot of different ways to approach this. And it goes just beyond save and pay, save and pay, save and pay. Right. There's a lot more things you can do.
A lot more creative. You mentioned earlier, 529 plans. That's a common education savings tool here in the US. In Canada, they have something called the Canadian Registered Education Savings Plan. Uh, a similar tool. There's some limitations. You basically can save up to $50,000 per child. You can do it either by making one lump sum contribution and you get one small Canadian Education Savings Grant, or a lot of families will just make regular annual contributions and they'll get a savings grant each year. So either way, it's a way of accumulating money. Now, the great thing about 529 plans is if you're in the US, is they are a great tax-free strategy to get capital appreciation. Now, the thing of it is, though, if you're a student for whatever reasons decides they want to go to Canada to go to school, a US student, you're going to all of a sudden have a taxable event. There's going to be Canadian taxation on the earnings unless the ownership is transferred to a US resident, right? So you have to be mindful of the
Right.
geography here, right?
Well, and there is in the situation also for US based 529s at international schools. So there is a little bit more good news than that. And that is um, many international schools, your better known names internationally, are still part of the US federal student aid system, or what we
Exactly.
call our Title IV system. So if you're a US resident with a US 529, but your kids can go off to college in Canada, paying for that college in Canada using US 529 would still be subject to the same tax rules as paying college in the US, which means the earnings, as long as it's qualified expenses, would not be taxable. But the thing to watch out for is not every international school is part of the US federal
This is
student aid
exactly
system.
you took the words right out of my mouth. I was just going to say that. So in Canada, there's some pretty well-known schools. I think of a couple right off the bat. McGill out of Montreal, UBC. I would imagine Western University, although I'm not 100% certain, in London, Ontario. They are eligible because they are under that program, but they're not all Canadian institutions participate. So that's the key part that you were making earlier, is that not every school will qualify to get those tax benefits. There's another side of the coin note, Jack, I wanted to share with you as well, and this is regarding the registered education savings plans in Canada when the client becomes a US resident. First things first, they have to report all that income on their federal tax return that used to be tax deferred, and again, no longer tax deferred. There's another thing you have to report them if they're more than $10,000, and they likely are. They have to do FBAR reports. They have to include that in your tax. You cannot hide that money, right? The other thing I found and again, this is a personal experience with my own kids, the Canadian Education Saving Grant. Remember that saving grants money I was telling you about that accumulate? If your kid is going to school in the US, the odds are that you will not be able to utilize that Canadian Education Saving Grant money. You may, in fact, have to give it back, right?
Right.
So there are some also you have to be mindful with with the RSPs. There's risks of potential, some tax issues on the gains of the money that's no longer tax deferred. There's potential double taxation risk. Then you have, God love it, the state of California. They don't really recognize the U.S.-Canada tax treaty, and there's also potential taxation there as well. Not just, registered education savings plans apply. Also, your retirement accounts apply as well. So there is some complexity to this. But again, this is why I'll tip my hat to you, Jack, in terms of the strategizing when it comes to funding a kid's education here in the U.S. I put you at the top of the list, and
Oh, thank you. And by the
I'm
way, just on those examples that you gave with the RESPs, there is some grumblings, rumors, if you will, that so many states here in the U.S. at the state income tax level will offer a income tax deduction or something if you contribute to that state's 529 plan. I know here in Massachusetts that's true. There's some grumbling now where with the law that passed I don't know, a couple of years ago, Secure 2.0, that allows unused portions of 529 to be rolled over into a Roth IRA for that beneficiary, right? And a lot of restrictions around that, but that's the basic gist. So the grumbling is that if you don't use it for college and roll it over, the state may try to claw back some of their tax deductions that they gave you way back when.
I wouldn't be surprised at that.
Yeah, neither would I. And honestly, with some of the rules around the rollover, I'm not sure people would even remember. I mean, but just like you don't want to get hit with like unexpected tax bills, right? Because again,
No,
that's no fun.
no way. So, given your experience, in helping U.S. families fund their college education, if you could, just as a tip here as we wrap up the podcast, if you could share maybe one tip in terms of helping family, pay for their kids' tuition without compromising their financial future, what would that be? And what's the first step they should take? And just sort of the one little nugget that before we wrap up the podcast here.
Yeah. So I'll go more on the cost side, because that's where I always start. Is we try to lower costs and maximize aid first. And this is not about some secret code on the financial aid forms or burying money in your
No Da Vinci
backyard.
Code, Jack?
No, no, unfortunately not. But really gets back to this whole concept of the NFL draft. Um, and I often tell students, hey, if you have the resume for an Ivy League school, but you go somewhere else that let's say is an Ivy League, you might be going for free, right? Because that's what they're looking for. So so my one tip for the family is like if you're target fixate on the name because you really want that bumper sticker or be able to um brag at like holiday family lunches or something, that's one thing, but you're going to pay for it. But if you want to be smarter about your money, go to the school where the school doesn't just accept your student but really wants your student. And how you know that is they give you a giant aid offer, and yes, those do exist.
For those watching us today, Jack, we've got your contact information right under your on the screen here below. But we have a lot of folks that listen on Apple and Spotify, like yourself, on your podcast. For those folks listening in, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Yeah, so the best way is they can always email me at Jack at Longhorn FIN, so short for longhornfinancial.com. Phone number 978-761-9201. Or I encourage everyone to actually look me up on the podcast. So Apple Podcast, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all the major platforms. Look for my podcast called Smart College Buyer, where I talk about all this stuff and more.
Jack, great conversation. I'm really glad I had something I've been wanting to do for a while now. Really appreciate you joining us today. Thanks very much for having time for us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me on, Wayne. I really
Great.
appreciate it.
Jack Wang joined us from Boston, Massachusetts today. It was a great guest. Thanks, Jack. I look forward to bringing you the Three Questions podcast, and I do hope you find them educational and informative. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to our podcast and YouTube channels. And to receive a notification of when our latest episode has been posted, please click on the notifications bell. Last but not least, to schedule an online Zoom consultation with me to discuss your wealth management needs, please click on the link in the description box below, www.onecapital.com/meet with Wayne. Thank you, and we will see you soon.